Dave, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Um, There we go. Dave, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Let me switch my AirPod. Maybe it's my AirPod.
What is going on here? Technical difficulties.
Can you guys hear me? Nope.
I don't do this, so I will.
Meeting owl for smallers. Meeting owl for microphone. Okay,
Test mic. Check.
everything is plugged in.
Um,
Dave, if you are talking, we cannot hear you.
all right. Well, I am talking, so let me see.
I'm not sure who it is.
All right, what about now? Nope.
Ben was on the committee, did you know?
Yeah, he can.
Okay. You know, so if they're just the only one who wants to call in, we can always put them on the phone. Yeah, we could ask, or if he's across the street, he can just come.
I'm at the brewery.
Oh, there we go.
You hear you
Oh,
now.
all right.
That was really weird. All right. Okay, I have it recording, so we will share this with the committee members who could not make it tonight. And try and do a better job to find a date and time that gets more committee members.
So Dave and Denise, both thank you very much for coming. And Ellie, thank you for sitting in. I think I'm going to say that there is a PowerPoint presentation, but it really is just a sketch of what I wanted to go through tonight, which is the memo largely. The first couple of slides are just a welcome and introduction. I believe it's just a little bit of a project overview to remind you of the steps that we are taking in this project. And then this slide, which is the proposed changes to the development code, kind of goes over the areas of the code that I wanted to discuss and the changes that I'm sort of proposing to recommend at this point. But since we have a really small group, I would propose that I'm going to start by asking if anybody has had the chance to look at the memo and actually digest them. Just glancing at it, looked at it, just a glance. Did you
Yeah, I read through it.
read it through it? Okay. Good. Okay. So we'll go through it in sections. If I know that code is not necessarily something that everybody loves, so hopefully this isn't mind numbing. But this is also, these are the highlights of the things that I actually pointed out and had conversations with Jordan about changing. There actually are a number of other smaller things that I think need to be captured, but they aren't really really up for debate. Instrument examples like the code currently references a fire department turnaround standard that is 5 years out of date from the current fire code. So those kinds of small changes, I don't know that we need to take time with the committee to review. That can be something that's proposed directly to the planning commission and city council, because they're really just fixes, Scrivener's errors almost at this point. But the things that aren't are part of the memo that I brought forward today. So let's start with consolidating the zones. So do you want to go to the next slide? This map may be challenging to see, although Dave, you may actually be able to see it better than the rest of us, is
No, I'll sit by you. Oh, good. Okay.
No, come over. So this is the zoning map of right now of downtown. What you need to look at in here is basically that there are three different zones that currently are within downtown. The orange, which is the primary portion of the downtown, is labeled as downtown, which is nice. But there also are a number of what are colored on this map as red, which are commercial, at either end of the district, as well as some commercial / residential zones, which is a kind of a mixed use zone that kind of abuts the area in a number of different locations. Specifically, it's the zoning for a lot of the port property that is on the other side of the street. And as well as a number of others locations. So you basically have three zones right now. If you've read these zones, the only difference between the three zones is the use list. And the downtown zone specifies that it is intended to implement the downtown plan. And by doing so, and in doing so, it also has that one line sentence that says that it wants to encourage architectural design that's from the 1920s to the 1940s, and matches 4 different specific architectural styles, which would be in order: Craftsman, Colonial Revival, and Cascadia, and I don't remember the fourth, doesn't matter. But that statement comes out of the downtown plan from 1992. And that's the only difference between the three zones. Otherwise, all of the rest of the zones, including all of the development standards per se, are the same. So parking requirements are the same, building height requirements are the same, articulation and building form, how you place windows, and all of those details that are part of the zoning are all the same in all three zones. And so I would recommend that this committee recommend to the planning commission and council that these three zones be consolidated. And then as part of that consolidation, you come up with one set of architectural standards that are then applied throughout the entire district, rather than having at this point 3 different sets of codes that people have to figure out which one they apply to. As part of that, that would require the use or the development of a new list. Actually go to the next slide. I was gonna say it would require the development of a new list of uses. And the modification of this one sentence, which is the purpose statement for the D zone, because at the present point, I am recommending that we eliminate the line that mentions the downtown plan and strategy, in so much as that it's almost at this point 30 years old. Leave the text associated with encouraging development and the use of land in downtown in the manner that strengthens downtown core as the economic and cultural center, but then removes the last final caveat that said in a manner consistent with and supporting the goals and planning documents. So that we're basically just updating the use or the purpose statement for the consolidated zone. Thoughts, comments? Dave, what do you think? Denise, what do you think?
I like it.
Yep.
And do
My question here is, so, well, okay, so if we're gonna move zones around, I see the map of the existing zones, but what would the new map look like?
If you guys are want or agree with that, then I will have a new map made. Or I will ask my GIS tech to kind of draft what a new map might look like. I haven't gone that far yet because I wanted to bring it forward to the committee to see what you thought first.
And I guess.
Okay,
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I mean, I guess we had talked originally about like how far and wide this zone moves or grows or changes, and we had talked about the port properties, and then we had talked about you know, how far do we want to go? And I see like, okay, I do see a consolidating of zones into one region, but what are your thoughts on how far this would go?
I think it would definitely incorporate the port property that's along Wanaka. I don't know that it needs to incorporate the larger port property around the park, because I think the uses that are listed in that are more appropriate at present than the set of uses that would be along Wanaka. So there's a kind of a different set of goals for that area than there is for downtown. As far as how far it goes up the hill on the east side, I think is something that the committee could talk about. And if that's something we want to do, that may be a great topic for the next meeting, so we can actually sit with a map and start drawing.
Okay, yeah.
But I think at this point, I was more, I'm interested to see sort of how everybody feels about the idea of consolidating the three and coming up with one unified set of design standards.
So I guess it's really two different discussions, consolidating the idea of the three zones into one, and then the second part of that conversation is actual footprint of that new zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I can understand that in the downtown corridor, but the commercial zone exists in other places in this town. So would we be adding them to the downtown zone, or would we just be expanding the current downtown zone?
In my mind, it'd be modifying the downtown zone and then expanding. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, but.
Yeah, basically, we'd be creating a new downtown zone that would be effectively one. I don't know that there's much of commercial residential left, honestly, though.
Once you get to Forest Lane, no.
Yeah, I think this may actually eliminate commercial residential, because I think we'd be capturing all of what's currently commercial residential.
Shit, I'm a big old map with me.
So how about we table the issue of the actual, how the boundaries of it are for the next time,
Yeah.
and I'll come back to that. So it may be more that we focus on, rather than calling it a consolidation, maybe looking at expanding the downtown zone within that area, and then having a unified set of standards for the entire downtown zone. That makes sense.
Sorry, I'm late.
I lost my purse.
Oh, no.
No.
I know, I
Still
still
not
not
found?
found.
Oh, no.
I left it in the truck and then John was in my car, so I thought he'd just grab my purse. And now I'm like,
You need to take time to check credit card.
no.
That's really, oops, it's distracting. Yeah, it's super distracting. Okay.
And sorry I missed it, Dave. We were printing because it's really hard to see the screen. Did we propose extending the downtown code? And then I wanted to remind folks that Main Street has taken it to the graveyard and past Scenic Winds. And I had suggested earlier to her going even out past the fire station, but Sherry at Oregon Main Street said, no, let's stop here. Because we have that old coffee shop. She wanted to be sure to include that and the sculpture foundry next to City Hall, but she said eventually. So I don't know if Dave's talking about going past.
But I think he would like to see what the full map is, and I think
Right.
that, so we'll just do that at the next meeting.
Okay,
And what I'll do is basically refine the downtown zone, the actual, just the text. And then maybe make a couple of alternate ideas for what that shape might look like.
and is there the name of what we might consolidate it all to? Do you like it to be called downtown code instead of? Yeah, okay. And
But that is totally up to you all. I think downtown's easy, but.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, the commercial zone would still be existent, just not in the downtown area.
Correct.
Okay, so we're just consolidating the three zones in our downtown area, just basically expanding the downtown zone.
Yes, and I think that's the thing. I probably should have used the word expansion rather than consolidation.
Yeah,
So that's what we'll
so
do.
Dave, I think, make sure so pretty much where Best Western and Bridgeside are as commercial would be combined with the orange downtown zone, follow all the way down to Wanapa. And then these little slivers of the commercial, this commercial residential here, but then how far up the south side hill we take it, I think is the question. But really, it'd be those three sections being combined together.
And what is currently on that south side hill,
Mostly commercial residential.
which, I mean, is it where we are now? Is it City Hall?
It's City Hall.
Well, no, City Hall's actually public.
Yeah.
We are this
This little-
red square. Right, yeah, can't see very well, right there.
The property's that next door that direction.
Oh, sorry, we're right here.
Yeah, right.
This one, that's the foundry place, or the
Okay.
purple guy, sorry.
What is that green spot next to the foundry?
That is open space. That's Scorpion Rock Park, where the skate park is.
Oh, where we,
Yes,
right,
skate park.
might be. Was, I don't
Yeah.
know. But, and will we talk about second floor housing at one point? Is
Oh,
that
yes,
allowed?
that's
Okay,
later.
okay,
Yes,
later.
absolutely. Uses is the next thing I want to chat
Okay.
about. So if you go a couple of slides forward, proposed uses. There's a laundry list of options, obviously. At present, the downtown zone has a fairly restrictive list of uses. It only allows a couple of little bits of types of retail. It has limited residential uses. It only allows one type of light assembly and manufacturing. It's very strange. I think it was written very specifically for the uses that existed at the time. And then a few things that they hoped for. It allows motels, but doesn't allow hotels, which is interesting. It doesn't allow, I mean, it's got some oddities about the downtown code. Versus the commercial and the commercial residential. And in your packet, you have a chart that I know is kind of challenging to read because it's little, but what I ended up doing, it's for the proposed use in the slides above you is just sort of the end column, basically. What I'm recommending we consider, which is just sort of unless you want to look at all the details of what each one of them currently does, and what we don't do. So I think that for ease of use, it makes more sense to actually copy some of the standards that are in the commercial zone and decide which of those you do or do not want within downtown, which is effectively what I've done. Because the commercial zone as it's written right now has a much broader definition of retail sales and service. It specifies, it breaks them into 4 or 5 different types of services and sales. So you have sales oriented, personal service oriented, entertainment oriented, and then repair oriented and drive-throughs, right? And then it sets them in, within that classification, you either have indoor or outdoor. I think that the commercial zone right now is probably the options for Cascade Locks because it offers a wider range of permitted activities. Without, I think, any of the potential, the uses that are really specifically prohibited or not preferred downtown, like drive-throughs. It wouldn't allow, repair-oriented things that are outside, so you couldn't have people with car lifts and having vehicular or automotive repair with large lots, things like that. It would maintain the orientation of downtown to a pedestrian oriented, but broaden the types of uses that are allowed downtown to allow a broader range of sales and service uses.
What about the houses that are already down there, like across from Thunder Island?
Single family homes.
Yeah.
Those are currently non-conforming. So they are already non-conforming uses in that zone. In the downtown zone, single family dwellings like that are not allowed at present. They aren't even allowed as conditional uses, but so they're listed as non-conforming. I propose that they stay as non-conforming. I don't think that that is a highest and best use for Winnebago to maintain houses, single family dwellings on Main Street.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that you leave that as a non-conforming use, which means that it's not permitted. And so you wouldn't get any new single family homes, but so long as they maintain them and keep them occupied as single family homes, they can.
Even if they sell?
It's based on use, not ownership.
Yeah, the house I just bought in Gresham's non-conforming. It's actually in heavy industry zone.
And conditional use.
So a conditional use is a permitted use that has conditions. So those uses would go to the planning commission for approval. And within the code, there are a list of criteria that every conditional use has to meet, which is basically designed to mitigate any potential impacts that use might have on the district. And so there are a couple of things here that are different from your current code. Religious assemblies are actually currently listed as permitted downtown, but conditional use is otherwise, which is other. No, it's a conditional use downtown and permitted in commercial. I would recommend leaving it as a conditional use. Just because churches actually have a very different physical impact on a community because their timing of the occupancy is so different than everything around them typically. Because they're really evenings and weekends. So it's actually a pretty great conditional use to have next to other places because you can share parking lots and things like that. But you want to look at their impacts differently than you would a regular business. And hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts. I would love to hear what your thoughts of as a group as to whether or not you think they should be conditional or permitted outright downtown.
If we permit it outright, can we put a limit? Or no? So maybe conditional is good. I mean, I would hate for all of Winapa to be hotels, motels and bed and breakfast, but.
Yeah, well, curiously, right now, hotels, motels, and bed and breakfast are listed as conditional uses downtown, but they're only motels are listed as permitted in commercial and commercial residential, and otherwise bed and breakfast and hotels are not allowed at all.
That's odd. I don't like that, but. With conditional use, then we have to write some of those conditions.
Typically, conditional uses for hotels and motels would be the same, the same things you'd be looking at. You'd be looking at parking impacts. Garbage, potentially outdoor recreation areas like pools and enclosures around a pool. Those types of things.
But this is your recommendation condition.
I would leave them as conditional.
Okay.
Because then you'll be able to look at some of those issues. But you could make them as permitted if you prefer. Jordan, do you have a thought? Do you care?
Well, hold on. So if we take the downtown list that has currently permitted uses, and then we combine it with we expand it and adopt more of the commercial allowances to it. I mean, if we take away something from one category that used to be allowed, does that create any issues? Or I guess only if there's an existing use and then you take it away, is that when the issue arises?
Correct. If we have an existing use that nobody's doing, it probably doesn't matter if we take it off both the permitted and conditional use list. If we have an existing use that's listed as permitted and we take it off both either the permitted and the conditional use entirely, then we would have a problem because we're creating a nonconformity. That can be a choice. You can do that. We just have to choose to do that. We would want to know that we were doing that and make a very clear reason why. I am at present not really, I don't think I'm making anything that's currently permitted downtown not permitted. Regarding hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts, right now they're conditional downtown and they would remain conditional. So that doesn't actually change anything on that.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm looking at the list here that I got emailed, and it says restaurants, taverns, and lounges were permitted under downtown, and under your recommendation,
It's vacant.
they're not allowed.
Right, because that's actually defined as part of entertainment oriented retail sales and service.
Okay, and then grocery stores without gas. Currently, we have grocery store in downtown.
Right, they're also retail sales. I'm not certain. Part of one of the reasons I want to go to the broader categories of retail sales and service is because it captures a lot of these other things like personal services and grocery stores. And I don't know, there's no reason necessarily to call out every type of grocery store or retail or type of thing, commercial use independently, like the downtown zone has started to do. Like it calls out museums, theaters, and galleries and studios separately. Whereas in the commercial code, those are those are put together as entertainment oriented.
So it would mean making sure, going back, looking at our definitions, and they capture everything we want them to capture or not capture.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so we would define that, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's already defined in the code, and so, and all of those things are already part of it. I think when the code was written, it appears to me that they wanted to restrict the type of sales and service stuff that existed.
They had a very specific vision
Yeah.
where they wanted downtown.
And so they didn't want banks, they didn't want hair salons, they didn't want any of those things there. And so they're not allowed. Instead, you have the only things that are allowed downtown are museums and theaters and galleries and restaurants. Okay, but very tourist oriented, very specifically tourist oriented. So what you don't have, and then grocery store, because of course they still wanted to allow a grocery store, but nothing else that would be, like you can't have a pharmacy downtown under the current code. You can't have a lot of the personal services that people in the community seem to want.
I would assume the idea was essentially two sections of town, the tour section of town, Wanapa, and then the local section of town, wherever that happened to be built,
Right.
which at this point doesn't exist, so.
And I mean, it's certainly based on the strategic plan, so much of our community feedback was that the community wants to see more personal services within
Yeah.
available to them within the city limits of Cascade Locks. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to sort of allow those uses downtown. We still don't want drive-throughs downtown, so even if you allow a bank, it wouldn't be a drive-through bank. But at least you'd be able to have those types of uses.
What does that do to Eastwind?
Maybe
Because
not
it has a
conforming.
drive.
They're non-conforming,
Okay,
and they're non-conforming in so many ways.
Yes, yes. But they're delicious, they're delicious.
they bring in people, but you're right, they
And
need
all
some
ice cream go.
guidance.
Dave, does that make sense? So it's.
Yeah, no,
it's
okay,
not-
yeah, no, I guess for me, I saw the chart of the different uses. And I didn't realize that there was we're trying to consolidate under a few uses. I just saw some that were no longer allowed in different areas.
Okay. Well, what I will do as part of the narrative, then I will make sure that I'm really clear, include the definition of retail sales and service that's in the code right now. So we have that list.
I think that would end some of the confusion.
Yeah. Cool. The one question I don't have an answer to, and I didn't know what you guys thought. The current code prohibits anything bigger than 15,000 square feet for a retail store downtown.
How big is Columbia Market?
Not 15,000, that's 15,000 is huge.
That's like Walmart, like big box stores,
Yeah.
right?
Big
Well-
box
So Thunder and the
stores-
Brewing Company is 9,500.
I was gonna say,
and
it's
that's
not
inside-
actually as
inside
big as
space.
you thought.
Okay,
A lot of Walmarts are actually, Walmarts typically sit closer to 100,000 square feet. 110 is the one that's in Cottage Grove, and they wanted 150 to give you some kind of scale. 15 is actually, if you're talking about a 2 to 3 story building, is not huge.
oh, that includes all the stories? Can we specify,
Just the footprint.
yeah, the footprint, the.
Okay. I don't think that this is actually Dave, you can check me on this, but I think the size of the lots downtown will restrict this without us really having to.
Okay. Unless it's a double lot that decided to go.
Yeah, I mean,
So
the only one really would be the grocery store and the where the that whole parking lot that surrounds it. That's the only one that. And then if we're talking about expanding the area of the downtown zone, whether or not that includes the lots across from City Hall and then even down to the fire station, that could also present different situations.
What's common?
It's not unusual to have a cap on the size of commercial structures. I would not recommend only restricting retail stores. If you don't want huge buildings, it should be about all of the buildings.
Oh,
I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that you could build right now under the current code, you could build a restaurant that's 400,000, I don't know, there's no cap to it. But you can't build a retail store above 15,000. They were really trying to restrict retail.
Tom
were
and
really-
Travis have joined on.
Oh, great. Hi, Tom.
Not sure when.
Hi,
but-
Travis. I think they were trying to
Hi there.
make
Hi,
sure
hi.
that there was never going to be a big box retail. But big box retail is typically a lot.
Yeah.
what is your recommendation?
You want to keep,
I guess the one thing is in Carson they put a Dollar General in, so that's not big box I don't know if you'd consider that big box retail, but I can imagine the if a Dollar General wanted to open in downtown Cascade Locks, I mean I'd say, hey, what if we don't have a Dollar General and the code would just outright allow it. So
How do we keep that sort of thing from happening? But I don't even, I think the Dollar General in Carson is probably less than 15,000 square feet, so,
Relatively small.
they're relatively small, they're about 8,000 normally,
yeah.
maybe 7,000.
So how do we say no big,
Who's the Trader Joe's in town?
Nothing says bougie tourism more than Trader Joe's.
Right.
Yeah.
Bring it in.
but also, isn't that just people saying, please no, or how do you stop that?
You work with property owners to ensure that they have a higher and better use than having somebody like them to come in. I think that it would be safe and easy to keep the conditional use under, for things that are over 15,000 square feet.
Okay, conditional use.
And just say, you know what, any use that's over 15,000 square feet downtown, we want to have a conditional use.
So that could be, let's say the lots next to the gas station coffee shop sell for retail on the bottom and second floor housing that's possibly could be more than 15,000. Would it make it very hard for them?
Jordan, what is your experience with conditional uses here?
Pretty limited so far,
Yeah.
honestly.
I think, one of the things that I want to make sure that one of the things that we are going to be recommending changing later is part of the conditional use standard. So that conditional uses are not required to ever get, the conditional use permit is good for as long as that use exists.
Mhm.
So you do not have to get a, renewal of a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
And there are no additional fees annually or biannually or however for conditional use permits. It's a one-time permit that's good for the use so long as it stays as it was originally as proposed. Of course, if you amend the use, then you have to amend the conditional use permit.
Okay.
But-
So I have a question about that of the abandoned use, because if you
Mhm.
abandon a use for 1 year, then you no longer get that use. So what about if you remodel? So right now the Sternwheeler had the restaurant down there, and they left over a year ago. It's almost been we're coming up on 2 years, and then the port lease set out to a new business, and then they've been remodeling now for over a year. But it's like, all right, so the year has lapsed. So what happens if the grocery store gets sold and then somebody's like, well, I'm going to remodel it, and it takes them 2 years to remodel it? Do they lose the conditional use permit if the remodel?
No,
I mean, when you get the permit, you get the permit from when the completion of the project or when you start the project?
typically it's when you're vested, which under land use law, it means whenever you've actually got a permit in or an application that has been accepted. So if an application is submitted to the city, they have 30 days under state law to review that permit for completion. Once they have deemed it complete, that applicant is vested for that use. So it's not even once it's been issued, they don't even have to get that issuance of a permit within that window. They have to get an application in and complete. Jordan, that's how I believe.
I
mean,
believe so,
it's
yeah.
across the state. I don't think that's actually.
Yeah.
Based on.
So then how long do you have to remodel your building? Because
I
at that
actually
point,
I saw a Mexican restaurant in Cottage Grove take 5 years. it was a family-run business that just did like one room a year. That's what they were doing, but it took them 5 years and they maintained their vested conditional use for 5 years before they opened again.
So should we make our language in our permit process reflect those intentions? Say, you know, a year from the moment a permit is issued.
We can certainly be
But I
more
mean-
clear in the code, yeah. We could,
I mean, I guess another thing is like, let's say somebody leaves a use and they start remodeling, but they don't go tell the city, "Hey, I'm remodeling for this use to continue the use." I guess how do you know whether or not? Because if you're just doing a remodeling, the facelift on a building, you don't need a city permit for that.
No, and that's not typically, that doesn't mean you've lost the use. Most cities, when they're actually looking at non-conforming uses and the loss of a conformity is, they basically base it on when like the water is turned off or the electricity is turned off. And so that use is clearly no longer there. So that's when you would start that date for the 1 year duration before somebody needs to come back and make sure that they've actually started at least activating this space again. It's not, remodels almost never trigger changes like that in a conditional use or loss of a conditional use in any way. Which one are you particularly worried about, Dave?
Well, now that you're saying that everything's being consolidated in these different groups, and we're allowing more, I'm fine with a lot of these. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, you know, whether or not we're disallowing anything that's being currently allowed. And then what? Yeah, I guess that's my big question. Are we disallowing anything that's currently allowed? I guess like the Eastwind Drive-In, if they wanted to do a remodel, let's say they're like, hey, our roof collapsed, they start a remodel. Will they lose their drive? What will trigger them losing their drive-in?
Eastwood would have to
Non-permitted
literally
use.
close for a full year. And then that would be a problem if they closed for like 2 years. They'd be well past the exemption time period.
Closed for 2? I mean, what if they?
Closed, like closed, like there's no business there at all.
Okay, so there's like no business in the park at the Sternwheeler building, and we're coming up on 2 years.
Well, is that a conditional use down there?
It's a non-permitted use. There's no conditional use that was ever filed because it's been there since the 80s. So, now that you're coming up on 2 years, you're saying it's a 2-year period?
It's a 1 year period. I'm just saying that it's typical that you don't even start the clock until everybody's vacant. They've turned off the power and you're like literally.
Yeah, that place was never, they closed the restaurant down. He's referring to, it's now Extala,
Mhm.
but originally it was the Locks Cafe. They closed it down because it just wasn't very viable and too slow during the winter season. So it didn't really work for them. They still kept the facility still open. They're still operating out of there, but weren't operating the restaurant. It was used by the Sternwheelers.
Mhm.
So, but when they put in the Extapa file to put in the restaurant there, then all of a sudden they needed a conditional use, they needed a traffic impact study, which,
Takes time.
yeah,
No, the
So-
particularly traffic impact study.
it slowed things down considerably, cost them a lot of extra money. As far
Well,
as-
neither of those have been filed. So they haven't filed a CUP or a traffic impact study.
Actually, the planner for the port did a study and basically said it would not trigger, there's not enough traffic there to justify a traffic impact study.
Interesting. That's one of the things that I talked to Jordan about maybe changing in the code.
Okay.
The Cascade Locks' code jumps right to a traffic impact study.
right?
I recommend that we insert a statement
Well,
in there for a
one thing that will
traffic
help is if
impact
we get a
statement.
different, if we get a different planner who's not lining his pockets, because our current planner is extremely expensive and everything's been deferred to our planner rather than if we had a planner that knows our code and that understands the purpose of economic development in a community. Many of those things can just, they can make an administrative decision.
Well, most codes have a two-step process for transportation analysis. One is the traffic impact statement. This follows basically the TPR, the transportation planning law in the OAR. So you have a transportation impact statement that is basically like your plan, your analysis from the court that says we looked at the traffic documents or the whatever the stupid document is, the traffic engineering standards, and determined that based on the highest and best use, we will not be triggering the need for a traffic study. And that's the end of it. Most projects hit that. Most cities have that step first. And then if that TIS actually says, no, actually, you're going to cause a lot of traffic, then you go forward and actually do a full traffic impact analysis. And that traffic impact analysis is when you get an engineer in and you do traffic counts and you do all of the
The Sternwheeler in itself is probably the larger traffic impact study, which was already in use. So, yeah, definitely a restaurant would not have.
Travis, I can see you move, but I can't see anybody else move.
Yeah, it froze up on me.
We can hear you though.
What triggers things? What would trigger that and have to do the study?
Right now, it's is it 300 trips per day?
So if you saw that happening, or how would you?
It's based
Maybe
on.
Jordan's
Oh, no,
you
I
get
hear
back?
him.
So yeah, I think we got unstable internet on our end.
Oh, okay, yeah. We just missed like the last 2 minutes.
Okay, well.
Oh, really?
What we were discussing is the fact that we're kind of going around in different areas of the code at the moment, but we just talked about the fact that maybe part of the conditional use problem and the code requirement right now is for a full traffic analysis. But there is a way to insert actually just a review of traffic impacts that is a lesser threshold prior to having to do a traffic impact analysis, which I would really recommend. So that, because most businesses won't ever trigger a full traffic impact analysis.
And it's partly dependent on the type of highway. We're on a state highway. There's nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's nothing on a state highway that would trigger enough traffic in our community, very rarely, to require a traffic impact study, correct?
I'm not gonna say nothing. If you took the grocery store and the entire complex down there and redid the entire thing, maybe.
Basically,
I mean, a traffic impact study is basically what your expected number of vehicles per day, right? And in any period, and making sure that there's enough flow. So right now, that I mean, you're bringing up the port buildings down there in the park. There's the cruise. It's how many people can fit on a cruise. What's the expected attendance? What's the expected attendance at the restaurant? What's the expected?
Somebody.
we lost you, Dave. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
If we have cameras and just talk to each other, it'll,
Well, it's the.
no, it's pulling.
And maybe we should have them call in.
My.
Well, I think it's our internet, not
It-
their
it-
internet. So it's the same, yeah.
But I mean,
I think we're sort of.
Sorry about that, guys. Our little unstable internet here. Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and keep our video off to try and reduce the bandwidth we're using. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do the same.
Okay, so just to move us forward, what I'm gonna do for the next meeting, in addition to bring a map of the potential downtown expanded zone, I'll also review the current uses downtown and determine whether or not they would remain as existing, as proposed or as permitted versus conditional versus thing. And that won't be that hard. So I'll give us a list of everything currently downtown and what their status would be under the proposed code.
Perfect.
I've thrown out an
Yeah,
idea.
I guess for me, like when I think of the downtown, the East Wind Drive-In is a staple of our downtown. It's been here for, at least 250 years, I think, is when they opened. Or at least that's what their building looks like.
Hey, they
But
painted it.
yeah, no, they've been here forever. So if there was any person who wanted to renovate their building and there's a 1 year timestamp on it, I'd hate for them not to be able to exist as the current form of business that they are. But in the same train, though, there are some gas stations, two of them in the core of our downtown, and I think they are taking up a lot of sidewalk space and really ruining the flow of walking up and down the sidewalk of traffic. I think there's uses that I'd love to continue for forever, and then there's some uses that I'd like to limit or to adjust how the space is being used.
I think a derelict building ordinance, which I've pushed on for a while
Yeah.
now, would be very helpful. As in, we have certain minimum standards that will be required of any dwelling in the downtown zone, such as no police tape,
Yeah.
tarps, certain maintenance standards for roll-up doors, for roofing, no blue tarps on the roofs, shingles that are falling off, that sort of thing. So, I think a very good derelict building ordinance would help to give incentive to the people who are
Business code improvements for Cascade Locks, for recommendations to improve.
I think Hood River has a pretty good derelict building ordinance as well.
We do have some codes, if you look at the current old downtown plan, that are in violation, and we're sort of in between code enforcement right now as well. But, and then, yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we can look at some of these other things that I brought up. There's a lot of it. I don't know how much we'll actually get through. It's okay. Architectural downtown.
Page 6 in your package.
Yeah.
Okay.
This would specifically, what I'd like to talk about is if the committee as a whole agrees with me that we should remove the comments related to the 1920s and 1930s and the architectural styles, which would be what I'll ask. Well, Revival, Craftsman, Cascadia, and Arts and Crafts. I'm going to make a couple of statements real fast about, in so much as that those 4 styles that are listed are not commercial styles. They are residential styles. They were not used in commercial architecture in the 1920s and 1930s. So talking about a commercial district in the 1920s and 1930s with those 4 styles makes no sense. And so from an architectural historian's point of view, I had no idea what this meant when I read it.
So Craftsman style did not exist.
No,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as a craftsman restaurant or a craftsman commercial building at all. And matter of fact, in the 1920s and 1930s, it was almost all Art Deco was the
Right,
style of
absolutely.
construction for architecture, for commercial architecture. So if we really want to hit a time period, we need to change the style, or we just delete the entire statement. Use more clear and objective design standards within the zone, and use more figures to
Style,
have style guides.
reference towards style, post and beam,
And materials that you're
things
looking
that
at.
are, are classically craftsman style.
Roof frames, the types of the shapes of roofs that you're looking for, more recommendations for the types of architectural details that might be appropriate. But rather than actually trying to just have this amorphous comment that it shall be consistent with the historic character of the community. The problem with that is that Cascade Locks, as you know, doesn't have a lot of
If you go
historic
off the
structure.
historic character of Cascade Locks, you're not only all over the board, you're done on the cheap. You're done with, wood as opposed to brick. The historic character of Cascade Locks is not what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve maybe a craftsman style, but not as far as commercial.
What does
commercial
that
buildings.
do to buildings that are already non-conforming with that style? Do they have to conform, or do we?
Under the current code,
I mean, if we change it.
it will be easier for the people who are not currently in compliance to follow a set of objective design standards that don't reference a decade or anything,
Right.
then it will be for them not to.
But I mean, the buildings are already built.
Correct. When they remodel those buildings, they're going to have to follow that.
Okay, but without remodeling, they don't have to. So is that like a conditional?
No, it's just if
Okay.
if they do a permit to remodel the facade, you have to then follow the new code. So
Okay.
if they decided to change their storefront, they would have to follow the new code.
Okay,
But so mostly this only impacts like major remodels or new construction within this standard itself, but it's a very confusing standard, and I'm really not certain how anybody's actually ever really tried to figure out how to make a finding on that. Because if it's in the code, that means the staff has to actually make a finding, and then the client, the applicant could actually argue the staff's finding and appeal it very easily. This is kind of this is a code right here that I would
It's
say
all in
could be
all in the
appealed.
hands of the architectural review committee but it's also up for grabs.
But then it's gonna be, it could be appealed to the planning commission and city council, and it could go all the way to LUBA. It would be a very challenging standard to fight
so
from the city's point of view.
if we are proposing changes, is this something that you help us write it up? And who, is this have to go to the planning commission? Right,
So
okay,
the process for all of these changes is once we kind of consolidated down to what the kind of changes we want to make, I will refine recommended text for Jordan, and then we will have to write a staff report that explains it all. Hopefully this memo will give a lot of that information. And then it will go to the planning commission and city council. City council is the one who finally approves this. It requires 2 public hearings. It is a legislative application.
Yep. Yeah, so this committee would make the recommendation to the planning commission, they would approve it, and then it'd go to the council to approve.
Okay.
It's not a quick process in
No,
any
it's
way,
not 4 months.
any way, shape or form.
To eliminate all the ambiguity and be very a lot of specificity of roof types and
as long as it doesn't make it too developer unfriendly.
That is actually absolutely the point. This is
Yeah.
really developer unfriendly because they don't know how to read it.
Okay,
So this doesn't, it looks like it's like, it's okay, you can do anything you want, but that's not at all how it's read. It says shall be of an architectural style consistent. And then it's the architect and the developer then has to figure out how to interpret that.
okay,
And anybody in the neighborhood can come in and argue their interpretation of it. So what it leaves you up to is a potential use battle.
they use Frank Lloyd Wright as an example of that time period, although he was mostly residential, but
Yes.
certainly
You
could
could-
argue for a
You
style.
could argue that he did a couple of arts and crafts commercial buildings.
Yeah.
I would give that argument, yeah.
It'd
okay.
be interesting
In Wisconsin.
to see how the code for Leavenworth was written, because obviously
Oh, Leavenworth was written in the 1990s, and I've read it, and
And
it is
very specific, I would imagine,
It
about
is-
certain.
insanely specific down to the font style that is allowed on temporary signs.
I don't think we want to be
I'm
that.
positive you do not want to go there unless Jordan's staff is about. to-
And Santa Barbara is another one. Santa Barbara also had very C-shaped roof tiles, et cetera, to get a very specific look in their downtown. And
It just takes, it takes a lot of enforcement to get to that level. And also a lot of turnover in your commercial districts. So a lot of movement of properties and businesses in order to get those buildings that are just out there already remodeled into that style. So Leavenworth has, 300,000 people who come there every year to look at downtown. So they have a real churn in businesses, which is part of how they can justify that. Whereas I don't think Cascade Locks has the churn in commercial turnover to justify.
about 83,000 this century. Classic.
Travis and Dave, since you built buildings, do you have any comments about this?
Yeah, they're still there.
Hi, sorry. Yeah,
The
um,
think that ARC, yeah, this needs to be deleted, and then I think really at this point, anybody who's willing to invest money in Cascade Locks, I'd say go for it.
Well,
And make it easy for them to know.
coming in here and the fact that both of your buildings fall under the same design code makes absolutely no sense to me. They're two very completely different buildings, but yet fall under the same design code.
Oh yeah.
And I just want to know what the actual findings were to justify it. As a staff writer for lots of applications over the years, I'm trying to figure out how the findings were actually written for them, but that's beside the point. I like both your buildings. So I think what we need to do instead is, personally, I think we should just focus the code on trying to get the massing and the scale that we want of structures and enough detail on the structures so that they're not, you're not walking through a strip mall.
Right,
And which I think is generally the sense that we all want, right?
right.
So that without trying to specify that it needs to be any specific style.
Perfect.
That goes along with the next set of code sections that I recommend in here, and I would love you guys' opinion on, I am a firm believer that you should not regulate paint color. And I'd love to know what you all think about that.
Can we accept, so are you saying if somebody wanted highlight yellow, that's okay?
Yep.
Do you see that in sort of historic towns?
Yep. And I have seen it, and I've seen it look beautiful. We actually have a bright yellow building in downtown Cottage Grove that I love. We have a white building, a white and black building in downtown Cottage Grove that looks great. And a building that was partially painted fire engine red, and it looks really great too.
I saw some like in Reedsport that were bright. And I've seen some with pool.
And murals and things
Yeah.
like that. The thing with paint, in my opinion, and I come from a historic preservation point of view in this, is that it's a preservative, it's a maintenance thing. And you want property owners to want to paint their buildings and keep them maintained and keep them painted. The standard right now requires a pre-application for painting a building and architectural review committee approval of the paint color. So it's a 6-week minimum process to even decide to paint your building right now.
I think that, that, I'm not sure that, Travis can speak to this, but I think that, that was done through administrative review with, Gordon Zimmerman.
I'm saying what the code requires,
Right.
whether or not that has been
It was not
actually
observed,
done.
I don't think.
Correct. But if.
And I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying.
But the problem is if your neighbor knows what the code requires, they could then tell the city, appeal against the city and actually fight the city legally, and the city would lose because they're not following their own process in their code. And their code right now requires about a 6-week approval process that includes a notice to all the property owners within 200 or 300 feet of the property about that paint color. And so it's opening up your paint color choice to all of the neighbors for approval every time.
Seems like it should just be able to meet the general standard as far as the trim color. You can have any accent trim color you want, and the term, I believe they said earth tones for the body of the color, but the earth,
But it also,
is that gray? Is that black? Is that?
So I'm kind of in agreement with Amanda that I would be willing to go for any color. Anybody else disagree with that?
It makes me nervous.
any color.
It does.
Do you think it's working right now? The paint requirements,
Well,
And
I mean,
are
maybe
the
or
paints
just
done?
repaint their building.
which is not an earth tone.
No, it's like they went from this beautiful white building to like this weird purple periwinkle.
I like, but
That's the word. But no, I'm like imagining like driving down the Oregon coast and there's like these little, like fudge shops and things, and they're like the bright yellow and the bright red. And I don't like them.
yeah, and I don't mind,
I think they look trashy.
but so I don't know. If it's gonna help people to paint their buildings, then what is the standard we do have then? What
The
is,
standard right now says that colors for exterior building finishes shall be earth tones, creams, or pastels of earth tones, which I would say the Forges is not, by the way. I don't know how they got there. High intensity primary colors, metallic colors, and black may be utilized as trim, and detailed colors, but shall not be used as primary wall colors.
But I mean, what would you recommend? So
I would
obviously
recommend
there's
removing that entirely.
model
personally.
code, but I mean,
Most model codes do not have paint color restrictions.
and they do have painting, upkeep restrictions?
Yes, they have maintenance restrictions, but not paint restrictions. And it's a really political hot issue because a lot of, I think in the best of all worlds, we all would like to think that if we could control it, it would be better. But the mechanism for control is really highly subjective and allows a lot of room for neighbor to neighbor battles. And Travis, I would love, and Dave, I would love your guys' opinions on this. And I come from a very specific point of view, and I know that my point of view isn't necessarily everybody else's. And I want to figure out how we can write something in here that works for the businesses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only thing from a non-self-serving perspective is, I mean, because as a business owner who trusts that he has decent taste in architecture, I would love to just be told you can do whatever you want, Travis, because I will try to stay true to the neighborhood. But I've always thought, you need to have some guidelines so that you don't have a super modern building right next to a really classic building next to an Alpine style building. So I think having a total hodgepodge would look terrible. So having some sort of consistency in the code is good, of course. And but the paint thing is, I mean, some of you, if not all of you, have probably heard me vent about how the paint thing went down, but it was terrible. It was I was told by Gordon that, or I was told by Willis that he was told we could paint it any color as long as it fits, as long as it's in earth tone. And so we painted it alabaster. It's like a cream kind of off white. And somebody complained to Gordon. I assume it was just one person. And Gordon said that cream is not an earth tone and we have to paint it a different color. And he showed me the Columbia Gorge color palette. And it was like
Pastel of earth tones and yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. It was like salmon,
Pastel of an
bright
earth tone.
orange. It was a lot of stuff that to me was not an earth tone. I don't know how a neon orange would be an earth tone, but that was okay. And so we just kind of negotiated, and because he was strong arming us, saying you can't open. It was like the day we were supposed to open, and he said, "I'm not going to let you open. We're not going to give you occupancy until you repaint your building." So we had to hastily pick a color. He said, "Okay," and then we painted it blue. And I don't really like the color. We're just kind of stuck with it because it costs a fortune. And so, I would say having gone through that, I definitely don't want one person to have the power to tell us what color they like or don't like. To the point that was made earlier, having people be able to say yes or no is bad. So having a clear code, I think, would be absolutely necessary, or we're going to have future problems just like that.
I think I can agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, a clear code is sort of one question versus whether or not you need a code at all.
Well, I agree with you, Travis, on the architectural style or detail, but I am thinking now, paint color, after hearing Amanda and Caitlin and like my fear of bright yellow, and then like, it's so subjective that maybe it shouldn't be designated paint color, but there are architectural codes and maintenance standards, because that is very personal and subjective. I don't want to think that Denise's idea of good paint colors is the right one. That's really, I want to honor the people who are investing in this town, who are building the buildings and opening the businesses. And if y'all think bubblegum pink is
Yeah,
the color.
I think the problem runs into the fact that you were mentioning that the timeline. I mean, first of all, 6 weeks, design review, all of that. I think in my mind, that standard that is written there is fairly specific. I mean, certainly, maybe you do need it to go through design review, but 6 weeks and all of that. But like I said, the problem falls in giving one person too much power to determine that cream is or is not a pastel of an earth tone. Or is a rust color, is that an earth tone? It's almost maybe in some ways almost too broad, because that does give too much opinion. I mean, you know, but I think having a standard is definitely helpful. I think having trim colors, you know, people can make, if they want bright yellow trim colors, it's in there. You can have accent colors, that sort of thing, but
But you're an artist. I think any words that don't come with a paint deck are just words that could be interpreted. So either somebody needs to sit with a Miller paint deck and say
Pantone color
all these
256
things, or we
Pantone
say
color
no,
such and such.
we say paint it whatever you want.
And that would be very specific. Then if you go through all the Pantone colors and put down this many through that many, 256 to 384 are all within that certain range, you know, then that both is very specific and still gives range.
Well, and,
Yeah.
but what usefulness is that really?
Well, yeah.
mean,
That was my thought. I feel like people are going to find a way to make
Pantone
something.
matching system basically is a color.
I know what you're talking
system.
about, but I don't think that I don't think it's really it's not you doing anything that the community needs. It's not increasing particularly economic development within the community. It's not making it more business friendly, certainly. And
I think we're trying to create the wheel here. So I think what we have is bad and it should be changed, but we don't need to completely like rebuild this, right? So when we look to our neighbors, so Skamania County has National Scenic Area within their county, and they have landscape, exterior color, material.
that's because they're using the gorge standards. Yes.
Right, the same with Hood River.
Mhm.
And so I don't know why we're not doing that.
We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
You do not need
And
to follow
completely
the.
abandon
No,
the standards.
but right now we're trying to like completely recreate something. And it's like, all of our neighbors are already doing it, and I think they're doing it well.
If we want to do the same thing that Hood River and Skamania are doing, which is basically adopt the gorge standards, I think that's an option, certainly. But we actually need to look at the code and actually do that, because that's not what the code currently is. It is
No,
not.
right, yeah, right
Yeah.
now the code is bad, for sure, everyone agrees with that. It needs to change.
Are the gorge standards paint colors clear?
Well, I would tell you that based on the experience of gorges, no.
That's where we got our
Because
current. paint.
they tried to actually, Gordon referenced the gorgeous standards, and it sounds to me like they were given a copy of a copy,
Yeah,
and the colors were no longer accurate. And no, that's how they got a periwinkle building, because periwinkle is not an earth tone.
And that's why you would use a standard like a Pantone matching system where, when it's mixed, then it has to be, maybe there needs to be reference in the standard that it cannot be a reproduced printed.
The only time I've actually seen that used went to that level is typically when you're in a historic district that has a very specific style guide that has very, like these 5 colors basically. Go.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying, if you're going to have a standard, then you can have a very wide range of color. I mean, you could have, 100 different Pantone colors that are, if you give somebody enough different ranges of color, then it's not being super specific, but it is saying there is a specific standard. But that being said, there's a lot of them. You could have 150 different colors within those ranges that if you're talking about earth tone colors, that sort of thing. But in doing so, it also eliminates certain things out of hand, and it gets rid of that judgment call. If it doesn't fit within this range of Pantone colors, even if there's 150 of them.
But Travis, who did you buy your paint from, or where did your painter buy their paint?
I don't
You
know. I could find out, but I don't
And
know.
yeah, Cause that painter needs access to that actual color swatch, not a color copy, not a computer copy. Cause everything changes based on your computer. So I think that's where we've had problems in the past too. So it has to be like, you know, Ace Hardware paint number 522, so that they can take, if we are gonna be that specific, then I think we have to put it not on Pantone, but in a paint that people are using, because you can take a Miller paint swatch to any paint store and match it.
So it seems like, I mean, Hood River and these other cities have a way that they're doing things right now. Can we just call them up and ask them, hey, how are you? Do any of your local businesses have to repaint their building after getting a color approved? Like, how do you guys deal with this? Because
Yeah,
I
I
feel
will-
like it's a much simpler process than providing every single color paint tone, and they're just pointing to the gorge, the Columbia Gorge color thing. So it's like, is there a person in the office there, or like, what can we do to make this simple? I think we're overcomplicating it right now.
Well, I've written a note that I will check with Hood River and figure out what they're doing. More importantly, I think we need to change the administrative process regarding paint
Yes.
so that it doesn't require a pre-application, because I think that's ridiculous. And it doesn't require a type 2 land use review, which is basically a city administrator land use approval. We could put in here a variance, if you want to apply for a different color that isn't within this range, then it could go to an administrative approval
Yeah, I like that.
Okay,
rather than requiring an administrative approval. So
right.
then it would just be something that you could do on your own, so long as you follow the code. And it's not gonna be questioned unless it becomes an issue. That work?
Yeah.
Add.
I feel like we're works on the. Whatever.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, we got it.
See her all the time.
Yeah, because I can't imagine that Hood River talks to every person who's painting their buildings.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And Jordan definitely doesn't want to.
Yeah.
On it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Great. We have a direction for it on that. That's fabulous. Okay, temporary uses is the next section that I wrote in here. We don't really have a temporary use section currently. And I would recommend creating one. And I know that there was a very brief amendment made to the code to allow temporary retail and service uses in the commercial districts to allow the coffee shop over here. And Jordan said that that was basically a placeholder for a longer chapter at some point.
Yep.
So I would recommend creating a temporary use section that expands the types of temporary uses that are allowed to include temporary food carts, and then establish some standards for temporary food carts that is separate than a general temporary retail. I put in here that some of the typical ones that you have, that people normally have recommendations, standards for, are seasonal and special events things. Temporary commercial or industrial buildings, which are typically associated with construction projects. And then temporary medical hardships, which aren't in your code, and I don't know if you want them or not.
What are those?
Temporary medical hardships are typically, people can bring in a tiny home or a small manufactured home onto their property so that a grandmother can, or somebody who needs a medical support. Yeah, an on-site caregiver can stay there and it's at a year-to-year basis. So you can, it's like allowing somebody to bring their RV on because they need medical help.
But you mean in our downtown zone?
Anywhere in your city. I wouldn't
Oh.
recommend necessarily that if I
Okay.
was going to create a temporary use section, that's one of the things that you could write a temporary use for. We don't need to do that.
Okay.
now. But it's something to bring up later that you might want to consider doing.
Something,
I think that's good.
something I'll throw out there, which I've said to a few people, is the idea of an overlay zone that in the future is designed to connect the east side of our town with the west side of town, because we are beginning to talk about, actually, our Forest Strategic Business Plan has plans for some development on the east side. So a overlay zone down Forest Lane, which partly because Forest Lane is wider streets, better access, oftentimes larger lots. And basically it would be then you could have a non-conforming use, along that stretch of Forest Lane between this side of town and that side of town, through a conditional use permit. So if somebody wanted to have a farm stand, which legally is not currently allowed, or to have a home-based business that actually has a sign, and there are a lot of things, that sort of fall under home-based businesses, but there are oftentimes don't meet the standards about noise, about other things, but other things could be allowed based on conforming to a conditional use. You know, it's all about mitigating the potential impacts if there's traffic or noise or anything like that. Then if somebody wanted to put in a little coffee house or a garden stand or something like that, it's a way of connecting the east side and the west side of our town. A lot of towns, Jacksonville, a lot of communities use that word. Some homes then might have a little insurance office or that sort
Well,
of thing.
cottage industries are pretty typical.
cottage
It's actually kind of surprising that Cascade Locks doesn't allow them.
Yes.
They're
As I said,
basically-
I've talked about it several times over
Yeah,
the
they're
years, but
large versions of home occupations. So it's typically, a cottage industry is typically a home occupation that has exceeded the limitations of a home occupation, but is still, but the owner is still occupying the property.
Right.
So it's still living.
yeah, the whole thing is about mitigating the potential impacts. And certainly if it doesn't have any negative impacts, then allow it under certain conditions.
So that's something we can wrap back around to. I don't know if cottage industries is really something that you typically talk when you're just looking at residential areas, Jordan.
Yeah.
That could just be a recommendation for
Yeah.
later.
For later, yeah.
Do we just want to stick with temporary food cart though standards, or do you want other types of, do you want like seasonal and special events or temporary commercial?
I like
I think it would be important because as we're moving forward, a couple of years down the road, we have American Cruise Lines, which will be coming in.
Mm,
And that will be, the opportunity there is, can we leverage money out of their pockets? I mean, and so being able to have seasonal kiosks
Yeah.
down in the port for vendors, for little art shops, that sort of thing. If you look at Roche Harbor up in the San Juans, they have seasonal kiosks at Roche Harbor.
Mhm.
And during the season, they have a lot of a nice little restaurant, a lot of special events going on, a lot of weddings and that sort of thing. Great restaurant. And those seasonal kiosks do a very good business. They're permanently built and just have, you know, doors that open up, and I could see something like that being very important here as we're looking at more tourism.
yeah, and I'm looking at temporary food carts and retail vendors, things like that, standards that basically specify that they, or food carts, that they have to occupy existing, that they have to have the permission of the property owner in which they're seated. Fascinating, a lot of food carts that I have seen actually they'll locate on vacant properties and they won't get property owner permission. So you have to have property owner permission. You have to meet the county's health code. I think that's very important.
Yes.
No.
And
Potential negative side of that, because currently we have what I would say are a lot of non-complying allowed seasonal vendors of cherries and salmon and everything else that have always been allowed, but don't meet any specific standard, whether it's health code standards, I think, or types of dwellings that are allowed or anything.
well, you could have a code that allows fruit vendors underneath a tarp. I mean, it doesn't have to be, health code doesn't require if you're selling cherries that you have a full commercial kitchen.
Gotcha.
It does, however, it require that if, for like a food cart that is selling tacos, that they meet the basic county health code, and they had to have a permit for that.
Right.
I would like to see the carts that currently exist, still exist, but under a code. And
Right,
on
exactly.
property
And
with
that was my
permission.
point. I wasn't saying
Yeah.
eliminate the salmon and eliminate the cherries, that sort of thing. But there should be some, at some point, some sort of minimum standard that should be applied to whether it's a sign code or whether it is not our sign code, our sign code, so it's actually.
Well, typically temporary use sections have their own sign code that tells you what the temporary uses can have for signage. That has actually turns out to be very helpful for future enforcement. A lot of, I actually have had to use temporary sign code enforcement a number of times on people who put like flashing lights and stuff on their temporary use, and that's not great for drivers. So
I
those
need
types
to-
of restrictions.
I need to check next.
So
door to-
I think there's the when it comes to the how to regulate these food carts, I think our job is just to say whether or not they're allowed. I don't think we need to be the health department. I think the health department's job is to do the health department stuff. I know all the salmon carts also have their own, health standards under the tribes as well. So I think really it's just we can just leave it as whether or not we want to allow these businesses or not. We don't have to dictate that they need to meet the health codes because they already need to meet the health codes.
True. You don't have to, I mean, we could absolutely write the section to not even mention health code and just let that compliance be on them. The last section I wrote did actually, they were required to at least give you a copy of the health code so you could verify it.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was written because in the time I was writing it for Cottage Grove, we had one particular gentleman who drove a bus around selling fish, and it was incredibly sketchy. And my city council specifically wanted to make sure that he had a health permit to do that. And so we actually made a code that said you had to give us a copy of your health code, your health permit.
I don't think there's any harm in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so does Hood River County have health codes
Yes.
for fish?
I don't know, they do.
And the tribes are regulated by themselves, so
Yeah.
they're not regulated through Hood River County Health Department, and they have their own system, and there is no code. There is no. I don't think there's a permit, and I don't think there's a. They go out and have everybody do their own food safety. Hey, let's get our fish on ice for this amount of time. Let's do this, and this.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a whole different world, but some people are envisioning or hoping for not really a replica of what's in Fairview and Gresham and Troutdale, but something at least along those lines where it's half a dozen or so food carts in town during our peak tourism season. We got to have some standards. I mean,
Yeah. They can, and we can, do you check with intertribal or, they can still exist and meet a standard. I mean, there's some nice carts down there and there's some that are,
We can also extend to tribes.
yeah.
which they pretty much
I mean,
already are.
under our current code, I don't think do we require that restaurants provide a permit of their Hood River County Health Department permit?
Yes, you do at occupancy. There is a requirement
At
to see the
occupancy,
health
we
permit
do.
before they open. So yeah, you do.
So I guess
And isn't
Yeah,
it hanging?
I mean it's a health department that we deal with, so we've updated our health occupancy permit a number of times to allow different types of food or this or that or whatnot. And the city at this point doesn't have any process or a portion of their code for every time we update them. I don't understand why the city would need that. I mean, we're still a restaurant, but we've,
We
And
the city
it's-
does, I don't think it's required, and I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't write a temporary food cart section without it, if we want to. Except my experience was based on a very specific issue, and if we don't think we're having that issue, we could just
Yeah.
not do that. I do recommend an annual permit, for them, because if nothing else, even if it's only like $10, it keeps them actually communicating and you get an address, like name and phone number and whatnot for them. But it doesn't have to cost very much at all, and it can absolutely be over the counter. But the property owner permission, I think, is really important, and making sure that you have property owner permission for them to locate on it is really important.
We had talked about putting in, like, was it Main Street maybe, like a food truck pod, where they were able to like rent a space.
Right, and or, in particular, if we're talking about the tribal things and simply the $10 a year thing, I like that we have the name and number, and that I think standards are always nice, and especially if there's intertribal can help with that, because there's money to help with tribal economic development. But, and then, I mean, I don't know if you're aware that it is my understanding that some of the food carts are on ODOT land, and ODOT has not given permission. And I don't know, I mean, that's not our place, you know, I guess. So it would be nice for everybody involved to know that they're doing the right thing.
Right, help each other, we're not
Yeah.
gonna shut anybody down.
No,
Trying to-
just saying. And then would that be talking to Best Western and saying, hey, can we scooch over or Bridgeside? Can we scooch back this way?
And the idea being that, yeah, maybe we'd be creating a new pod that in front of where the city owns, in front of the county building, in the plaza area.
Unless ODOT gave permission,
Oh, I mean, it might be as well as,
right?
so. All right, we'll come back with some potential recommendations for that. The next section that I wanted to chat with, and it is 5:30, so we are pretty much at time. Was gonna be about development codes, standards specifically that are conditions on development. And things that are within the code regarding parking and access management. Did you all, and parking design and those types of things, did you all have any thoughts on any of the sections you read, since we're right at the end of this meeting? General concerns or general things that you liked when you glanced at them?
I guess when I read that, it was all about residential, but I didn't see anything about commercial. So do we want to add something for a maximum commercial size of a driveway?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I want to put in a chart that has maximum sizes of driveways for all types of uses. That part goes, if the commercial is the next page. There's a access for non-residential. They actually just call it non-residential rather than commercial for some reason. That's the current, this was just an example that we would absolutely want to put in a minimum, a driveway width. The current code doesn't have a maximum, it only has a minimum, and I would recommend inserting a maximum. And this is actually really important. It deals with the gas stations and things like that, that when we have these long accesses that break up the curves. Having a maximum width is something that if we don't adopt now, it will probably be recommended as part of your GSP. So we just be bringing you them first.
So if we do that, and then the codes, the current use is out of compliance, again, is it a conditional use until they change? No.
No, if what happened, if we changed the driveway width and we said, I'm sorry, you can't have a driveway width that's wider than 30 feet. And their current driveway width is 50 feet. Then when they are coming in to redo their sidewalk, they'd have to change it down to 30 feet.
When do they have to redo their sidewalk?
Well, at least one of the gas stations is under a compliance order from ODOT right now to change, to fix their sidewalk.
News to me. All right.
It was based on an ADA complaint that was made directly to. the
So
board.
I guess one note I have on the sidewalk depth is ODOT for us said our sidewalk could be it needs to be 10 feet wide, but it can reduce down to 8 feet around for certain vegetation. So I know that ours is 8 feet at certain points. So I don't know if we want to include anything like that in our code.
I think
But
we absolutely
if
should.
we hadn't had the 8-foot allowance, our front entrance would have had like an altitude or a height change of over 6 inches, and we would have had to have a step.
I think that'd be a great idea. The current code says that it's 10 feet, but it doesn't say anything else. So, we can certainly add those caveats.
Do we have a code for, is that our code because it's on the street? Or not parking in the bike lane, or not, you know, standing in line in the park lane,
That's
in the
okay.
bike lane? That's ODOT.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is just there's stuff that needs to fix.
Right.
Jordan, do you have a preference, or is there anything related to sidewalks on the other codes? Part of the reason why this is confusing right now is the commercial district, which is within, kind of cut and feeds within, is only 6 feet.
Okay.
that's really narrow compared to most modern code. And it's really narrow for arterials and collectors at 5 feet. That's what the code currently says. It says one off is 10 and then everything else is 6 and 5. Current ADA actually is 6 feet, not 5.
And when you say are the connectors, does that mean we would have to redo that? Who does the sidewalk? Who pays for those?
Property owners as they're doing refronts, or the city when they're doing an entire project, or ODOT when they're doing a project. It depends on who's initiating the project.
Okay.
So no, I mean, you can make this standard but not see any modifications for years, or you may see it all at once.
Dave and Travis, Dave, you said you heard 10 feet and 8?
He had they had a 10-foot requirement, but were given, allowed an allowance to reduce it down to 8 if they had vegetation in landscaping.
So can we make a code that's different on Monaco than the arterials?
Absolutely.
On the others? And do we like 10 feet on Monaco?
I think 10 feet's great. And certainly inserting in there that there is a reduction down to 2 feet for landscaping or for a pedestrian, some kind of feature would be fine.
Yep.
I think it's more of a question of what are the standards for the remainder of the street types? I don't know. That could be something that's just punted at this point to Jordan until the TSP.
Well, ADA makes sense to me. ADA.
ADA is 6 foot, so we
Yeah.
could increase it to 6 if we wanted to, but it's also not required right now, I would think. And since it is going to be coming up. Oh, there's all sorts of things. Can we talk really fast as a group about the idea of removing the architectural review committee? Dave, did I hear you earlier say that you would agree to remove the architectural review committee? Or is that Travis?
It wasn't me. I had a toddler on my leg, so I missed the last 10 minutes, but yeah, I don't think I didn't catch any of the part about the architectural review committee. Is that the same as the board that there's like the plant design review board?
It's the same thing. I think it's the code calls them the architectural review committee, but I think they're typically called the design review board. My recommendation is to eliminate them, honestly. If we have better standards that we're writing, I don't know that there's a reason to have the architectural review committee. Instead, you would rely upon the staff to review these criteria with the applicant during a pre-application meeting and then take it to the planning commission. And so you'd eliminate that entire step of having an architectural review committee in the middle.
I like that. I've heard complaints about that and the time. People are saying the time that all this takes. And then, yes, just remember I talked to the Troutdale planner and he said our codes are very development unfriendly. People don't want to build here. It's too much of a mess.
There's still a planning commission. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the planning commission would still exist and they would still be the ones reviewing full site design reviews or conditional uses.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize there were two different things. I mean, what I dealt with was there was this nebulous group called like the Planning Design Review Board or something, and every time we wanted to talk to them, we were discouraged from it, saying that you have to go to a meeting, you have to get on a docket to request a meeting with them and then wait 30 days and then you get it, and then you can maybe get a meeting if it hasn't passed. And it was like basically like it'll take 75 days to get in front of them, or it was always really difficult. And then other people would just say, oh, just call them up and see if you can get a special meeting together. But it just so I don't know who these people are, because in my experience there's only one person we talk to about anything. And so I don't know. I mean, eliminating one of those two steps sounds great, but right now I don't even know that there are any steps or how we get there.
Right.
I don't know if that's a helpful statement, but it sure is confusing to me what we're agreeing to.
Right. So what the current, yeah. Would it be helpful if I did a sort of a matrix of what the current steps are versus what the proposed would be?
Yeah.
Well, I think there all seems to be a disconnect between what the process should be and what Travis actually happened, or what happened to him. It sounds like the process wasn't properly followed.
Sounds traumatizing.
Multiple times that it
Yeah.
wasn't properly followed. I would agree that I think there were a number of times that if I had been Travis's attorney, it would have gone differently. But
Shh, don't say that.
So, yeah, my proposal right now is to clarify what happens at a pre-application, because the pre-application conference is required for almost everything, which it doesn't make any sense. But it also doesn't require at present that the city actually give any formal information and commit to anything at a pre-app, which doesn't help. It's a step that it doesn't make any sense to have if that's the case.
Mhm.
So clarify what happens at a pre-application, reduce the requirement for a pre-application to those things that actually need it. Allow the applicant to request one if they want one at any time, just because. But then, so you don't have to go to a pre-app anymore. You can go directly to the planning commission if you choose, without going through a pre-application at all, and delete the architectural review committee entirely. So the applicant, if they're confident that their project complies with the code, can go directly to the planning commission and only have one stop rather than three.
I like that. I want to say, Amanda, that you've been a city planner, right? And you do this work with the University of Oregon, and you you comment like, here's the Oregon, OER, Oregon, that you know a lot more than any of the rest of us here. So, and you know what is, because you've worked with downtowns and main streets before, you know what has been successful or drawing in developers and what hasn't. What helps me is when you make a recommendation, if you said, here's some clear language, what I'm hearing from y'all, here's sort of what I would suggest. Are there any words you need to change? Because we can say cool ideas we think of, but we don't have that experience that you have.
Yeah. There were just some questions that I needed to vet with you all before I took the time to actually write new code for them, like the temporary use section. If we didn't want to create one, I didn't want to write one.
Right.
If we want one, okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys have 5 minutes? Because the only other question I really wanted to ask was about non-conforming use. We talked a lot about non-conforming use earlier and the timelines. I'm actually thinking that maybe we don't make this change. I was considering recommending that you change the period of discontinuation and abandonment for non-conforming use from 1 year down to 6 months. And the threshold down from 80% to 60% of the assessed value if it's rebuilt. That matches what I have been used to in the valley. It doesn't necessarily match what other parts of the state, though. I know the coast, almost everything on the Oregon coast for some reason is 2 years. Which I don't know why, but they for some reason, the coast in specific is 2 years. So the threshold for a nonconformity change varies across the state. If you guys are comfortable with 1 year, let's leave it at 1 year. So what I want to think is what we want to do is make sure that this is really strong so that it can be used to actually get rid of some of the vacancies downtown, hypothetically. Or at least encourage people to actually restore them. But the assessed value of 80% prior to a demo for a remodel still might want to be changed. Why that repair cost threshold is really important is that if you have a building that's completely non-conforming, if you have an assessed value of 80% of it, that means they only really have to maintain the foundation and they can rebuild the entire thing, and which
pretty much the entire building.
that's almost the entire building. 60% means that it's like 3 walls that they still have to maintain 2 walls in the foundation typically, or the roof and the foundation at 60%. So I would recommend maybe we leave the 1 year time period, but lower the threshold down to 60%.
Okay.
It will turn buildings over more to bring them into compliance with your architectural code.
Okay. And again, does this code compliance occur when there's a change or
Yes. So
not?
it would be only when they were changing. So if a non-conforming development came in for a major remodel, at that point, they would have to comply with this code,
Okay,
or the building burnt down.
so currently the non-conforming buildings or the derelict buildings don't apply to this.
They do apply to this, but they're at an 80% threshold. So say like the old fire station, if that entire building fell over, they could still rebuild it because their foundation is 20% of the project. They could rebuild it exactly the way it is. They wouldn't have to rebuild it to the current design.
Oh, I see. So the lower threshold is better.
The lower thresholds will encourage people, require people honestly to use the new design standards soon.
I like that. Do you?
Jordan, do you have a problem with that?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Leave it at a 1 year though?
So I guess, I think we had this conversation earlier, the 1 year time clock. So say the building burnt down today, they would have a year to complete it or a year to submit the application or permit to rebuild their non-conforming building.
What I will do is a year two application or a year two submission of an application.
Okay.
I will write that in here.
Because I would think if something burns down, the insurance process, the engineering
Yeah.
process, securing a general contractor, all of that's probably gonna take a year.
Yeah, because through lots of litigation, that determination has been made that it's to basically the vetting process. So once you have a vetted
Yeah.
land use application, that's the date of beginning.
Perfect.
But that is largely because that's been just gone through the courts a bunch of times. So we can put that in the code to make
I
it
don't
really
wanna go to
clear.
court.
Can we make like an addendum or something to it? Like saying if they need an extension, they could apply for an extension, like as long as they're like actively working on it, or it's gonna take more than a year?
Making if we specify this, that they just need to get the application in within
Oh,
1 year.
this isn't the whole remodel.
No,
This is.
they just have to add the application
Yeah,
in within
just
1 year.
kidding.
I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, I think you're.
You can't figure out your life, well, I take that back, I'm still figuring out my life, so.
I mean,
never mind.
they have a full year to get an application.
Yeah.
That's all. They just have to get the application in.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. I think that I have lots that I can do for next time, and we'll have a few things that are still left over. Although I think, Jordan, honestly, you can answer the questions I have regarding variances and annexations. So
I can attempt to, yeah.
I want to kill your annexation process.
We have nothing to annex, so it's perfectly fine with me.
Thank you all for coming, and Jordan and I will get back to you. The next round of meetings will really get into design standards, because Ellie is going to help me come up with a proposed set of design standards for downtown.
Yay.
Should be lots of fun.
Any last words, Ton, Travis? Or I don't see who's up there. Ellie?
No.
Ellie?
All right, I will, after I meet with Amanda, I will do a better job picking a date for everybody that we can all actually be here in person, so. Are we looking probably mid-October next meeting? So I'll throw out a couple dates here in the next week or so.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Looking forward to chatting design next time.
Yay.
Me too, Ellie.
So this is part of